There is a thing the old ones of Obiagu village used to say, and they said it quietly, the way you say things that are still true and still dangerous at the same time. A man may lie to his wife, to his elders, to his God, but he cannot lie to the ground beneath his feet. The earth knows what has been placed inside it, and one day, it gives everything back. My name does not matter. What matters is what I witnessed. What matters is what Obiagu witnessed, and carried, and now passes on to you, the way a wound that has healed is still passed on through the telling, so that others may know where not to step. Before I tell you everything about Pastor Caleb Nady, before I tell you about the high fence and the gleaming car and the smell near his compound that the palm wine tapper refused to describe, I want you to hear the one thing that ordinary people said about him in whispers long before the truth arrived in daylight. They said he prayed differently at night. Not the desperate, weeping prayer of a man seeking God's face. No. Something lower. Something that did not rise to the sky the way prayer is supposed to rise. Something that moved along the ground. Something that went down. And his wealth, his sudden, impossible, abundant wealth, they said it came too fast to be blessed. Because blessing takes time. Blessing is patient. Blessing walks. What arrived at Pastor Caleb's compound did not walk. It simply appeared, the way things appear when the price has already been paid in a currency no daylight bank will ever accept. Sit with me. I will tell you everything from the beginning. But I warn you now, this is not a story that ends when I finish speaking. This is the kind of story that follows you home. Obiagu was a village built the way ancestors built villages, not by planning, but by belonging. The houses were modest, the roads red and dusty in the dry season, red and clinging in the wet. The children were lean but unquiet, the way children are who have not yet been taught to doubt the size of their joy. Elders gathered every evening beneath the great Udala tree at the center of the village square. They talked about land and rain and the slow behavior of yams, and whether the ancestors were still paying attention. Ordinary life. Unhurried life. Good life, in its way. Obiagu was not a village looking for a miracle. But when miracles present themselves in the shape of a man with warm eyes and a worn Bible and a voice that seems to come from somewhere beneath the floor of the world, even a village that was not looking finds itself looking. Pastor Caleb Nady arrived on a Wednesday in the dry season, dusty from travel, carrying nothing remarkable except his conviction. He said he had come from a neighboring town. He said God had spoken to him in the night, had told him there was a village that needed his voice more than the city did. He had left everything. He had come. Old Chief Dyke gave him a plot of land, a plot no one else had wanted, close to the edge of the village where the path narrowed and dipped toward the ravine. Pastor Caleb accepted it with both hands and prayed over it in the presence of the elders as though it were the finest land in the territory. The congregation loved him for that. Humility, they said, was the mark of a genuine calling. He built his church with his bare hands and the willing hands of the villagers. He sweated beside them. He remembered every elder by name, every child by birthday, every family by the particular shape of their grief. He sat with the dying. He prayed for the sick, and some recovered, which the village credited entirely to God, as it should, and a little to Caleb, which is also human and understandable. For several years, genuinely, unambiguously, he was everything Obiagu had hoped. He had a wife. Sister Chioma, a quiet, devoted woman who kept the home and the children's ministry and never sought the attention that her husband's position could have given her. She moved through the village like water, smoothly, without announcement, reaching exactly where she was needed. And their daughter. Her name was Ifeoma. She was 12 years old when this story began. I want you to hold her in your mind from this moment. Remember her laugh, high and sudden, like a bird startled from a branch, arriving before you were ready for it. Remember how she sang in church louder than the women twice her age. Remember how she brought the pastor's tea to visiting elders without being asked, how she sat at her mother's feet during women's fellowship, and quietly embroidered the hem of a dress she was making herself. Obiagu had a child that everyone quietly claimed as their own. Ifeoma was that child. Remember her. No one in Obiagu could name the exact moment the change began. That is the particular cruelty of slow corruption. It does not arrive with a door slamming. It arrives the way the dry season arrives, gradually, imperceptibly, and by the time you feel the full heat, you have already been living inside it for weeks without knowing. The first sign was the money. It began with a new zinc roof on the church. Reasonable. The congregation assumed it had come from accumulated tithes. Then, new wooden benches, sanded smooth and varnished. Then a generator for the church, a real one, not the stuttering kind. Then a new car appeared at Pastor Caleb's gate. Not a used car pieced together by faith and mechanical mercy. A new car, clean, gleaming, with the particular silence of recent money. Then the compound expanded. The modest two-room house Sister Chioma had kept immaculate, swept daily, smelling of camphor and soap, was now surrounded by a new building of plastered block, tiled floors, glass louvres, and a painted gate. Within 2 dry seasons, the pastor's compound had become the largest private compound in Obiagu. His wardrobe became the wardrobe of a state commissioner. His phone, there were now 2. His wife's jewelry arrived in a box that came from a city shop. Not the thin, modest kind. The kind that makes a room quieter when it enters. The congregation rejoiced. This is the important thing to understand. They genuinely rejoiced. When a community has been poor together for long enough, the elevation of one of their own feels like a collective elevation. They claimed his prosperity as their testimony. They told visiting churches about it. They gave thanks. But Adana Ease sat in the 3rd row on the Sunday the new car first appeared, and she did not rejoice. She was 49 years old. The eldest daughter of a retired schoolteacher. A widow for 7 years, since her husband Emeka had gone quietly in his sleep on a Tuesday morning, leaving her a small house, 2 grown children in the city, and a quality of attention that had nothing left to protect it from the truth. She was not a jealous woman. She was not a gossip. She was the kind of woman who said little and heard everything, who stored what she observed the way the earth stores rain, patiently, underground, waiting to see what it grows. She watched Pastor Caleb step from the new car in his new agbada and raise both hands to the congregation in blessing. She watched his eyes. Eyes that no longer settled on any face long enough to truly see it. Eyes that scanned. Eyes that checked the perimeter of things. Those are not the eyes of a man who has received, she thought. Those are the eyes of a man who owes. She said nothing. Not yet. She returned to watching. The man who had once moved through Obiagu like sunlight began to move through it like a closed door. He stopped visiting the sick. He stopped sitting with the grieving. He stopped coming to the crack of dawn prayer meetings he himself had instituted. His greetings shrank from full conversations into nods. His eyes, once so open and direct, now slid sideways when held too long, as though something behind them preferred not to be seen. And he built the fence. Not the low, neighborly wall that says, "This is mine, but I still see you." Not the practical boundary that says, "Here is where my compound ends." He built a high fence. Plastered and painted. Solid. The kind of fence that says, in a language older than words, "Do not wonder what happens here." In Obiagu, a fence like that is not just architecture. It is a declaration. And the village felt it the way a body feels the onset of fever. Not yet named. Not yet understood, but unmistakably present. They explained it away, as people do when they love something they are not yet ready to re-examine. He is busy. He has many burdens now. Anointing sometimes calls a man to separate himself for spiritual purposes. They were generous with their explanations, because generosity toward Pastor Caleb still felt like generosity toward God. Then the strange things began. Ikeen, the palm wine tapper, told his wife that the path behind the pastor's compound had begun to smell differently in the early mornings. Not a physical smell only. The kind of smell, he said, that old people know and young people have not yet learned the name of. He began taking the long way to the palm grove. He did not explain why to anyone who had not already understood. Then the animals. Neighbor Obi's 2 goats, healthy, fat, impossible to kill, were found dead on the narrow path that ran behind the compound's back wall. No marks. No signs of struggle or predator. They lay on their sides with the particular quiet of things that have been drained of something the eye cannot see. The village herbalist came and examined them and left without his usual confident diagnosis. He left quietly. He took the long way home. He did not pass in front of the pastor's gate. Then the children fell ill. 3 families reported it within the same week. A night fever that arrived at sundown with the punctuality of an appointment and departed at dawn as though afraid of daylight. The children cried in their sleep. They reached toward things not present. Mama Okafor's youngest, barely 4 years old, was found sitting straight up in his sleeping mat at 2 in the morning, eyes wide, pointing at the wall of his room and repeating a single word. Under, under, under. His mother carried him to her chest and rocked him, and did not sleep again that night. In the morning, she told the women of the fellowship what her son had said. The women looked at each other. No one spoke the thought that was in all of their minds. Then came the sounds at night. It was not reported at once, because the people of Obiagu were afraid of being the first to name it. But over several weeks, as one family and then another quietly mentioned it to a trusted neighbor, and then a trusted neighbor mentioned it at the well, the shape of the thing assembled itself. A sound came from within the pastor's compound between midnight and 3 in the morning. Not prayer. Not singing. Something lower. Something rhythmic and private and wrong. Like a small thing, exhaling grief, it had long ago stopped being able to name. Deacon Tobias, who lived closest to the compound, sat outside his own door one night and listened until the sound ceased near 3. He came inside. He sat at his table in the dark. He put his head in his hands. His granddaughter found him there in the morning and asked what was wrong. He said, "I heard something last night, NNE, and I am asking God to let me be wrong about what it was." He was not wrong. The morning Iphioma disappeared, Pastor Caleb was calm. That is the detail I have never been able to lay down. That is the stone in the sandal of this memory. A father whose child has departed, even joyfully, even to a better place, even with a scholarship and a new uniform and tears of pride, carries a particular weight in his face. It does not matter how happy the departure is. Something in a parent always remains behind with the child. Pastor Caleb carried no such weight. He stood before his congregation on the Sunday after Iphioma's disappearance and announced, with the full authority of his position and the full warmth of his famous smile, that God, in his boundless provision, had made it possible for his beloved daughter to be enrolled in a prestigious secondary school in the city. He thanked the congregation for their prayers and their partnership in this blessing. He asked them to agree with him in faith that Iphioma would one day return to do mighty things for Obiagu. "Amen," he said. "Amen," they responded. Adana Ease said nothing. She sat in the 3rd row and counted backwards. Because she had seen Iphioma 6 days ago, not from a distance, she had spoken to her. The girl had been in her family's side yard helping her mother hang washing. They had talked about small things, the harvest celebration, a dress Iphioma was embroidering, a story Iphioma had read and loved. The girl had been happy in the particular ordinary way of a child who fully expects tomorrow to resemble today. 6 days ago. Not packing happy. Not leaving happy. Just alive. And not one person on any road leading out of Obiagu, not the roadside traders, not the early morning water fetchers at the borehole, not the keepers of the motor park, had seen Iphioma leave. No car had come at an early hour. No girl with a trunk. No goodbye. Adana visited Sister Chioma the following week, bringing a covered pot of food as her entry. Sister Chioma received her in the outer parlor, not the inner rooms, which was itself a thing to note. She poured tea. She sat at the edge of her chair with the careful posture of a woman holding a performance that was costing her more than it showed. Sister Chioma said Ifioma was well and happy at her new school. She said the child had called just yesterday. Adana asked to hear her voice. Sister Chioma said the school had poor phone reception. Adana asked which school. Sister Chioma named one. It was a real school. It existed. But when Adana's cousin in the city made quiet inquiries through a friend at the Ministry of Education, the answer came plainly. No student by the name of Ifioma Nadi had been enrolled in that school. Not this term. Not last term. Not any term. Adana sat with this for one full night. Then she went to Deacon Tobias. She found him as she had expected, a man also sitting on an unspoken truth, waiting to see if someone else would speak first so he could stop carrying it alone. She laid everything on the table between them in plain language. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he looked at the floor for a long time. Then, "The sounds I have been hearing at night," he said at last, "do not sound like a man at prayer. They sound like a man honoring a different agreement entirely." Adana felt the cold move through her despite the afternoon heat. She thought of Ifioma's laugh, the one that arrived without warning, high and sudden, like a startled bird. She thought about how she had last heard it exactly 6 days before the announcement. "We need the elders," she said. "We need more than the elders," said Tobias. They did not rush. Rushing would have cost them everything. Adana moved as a woman moves when she has nothing left to fear. Methodically, patiently, gathering each piece of the truth the way you gather kindling, one stick at a time, knowing that the fire it will eventually start cannot be unlit. She went first to the herbalist. He was not easy. He had a family to protect. He had lived in Obayagu long enough to know what happened to people who spoke against powerful men before there was enough evidence to make speech safe. But he had also, in 35 years of his work, never fully been able to quiet the knowledge that was now pressing against the inside of his chest. He told them that the ground near the pastor's compound was disturbed ground. Not freshly dug, not violently turned, purposefully arranged. He had sensed it first in the dead goats. Then, in the children's illness, which bore the markers of proximity to a place where something had been done. Something old and intentional and hungry. And he told them what kind of arrangement produces this particular disturbance in both the living and the earth. He told them what such an arrangement requires as its payment. Adana and Deacon Tobias did not speak for a long time after the herbalist finished. Together with 3 trusted village elders, men whose age had removed their fear of political consequence, they went to the pastor's compound on the night of the new moon. No torches. In the full darkness. They pressed along the outer wall to a section where a slow crack had developed. The kind that long rains open in improperly set plaster. Not wide enough to see through. Wide enough to listen. And they listened. There are things I will not describe in full. The old ones say that the mouth is not always the right vessel for certain truths. That some things must be carried gently, with both hands, and set down carefully. So I will tell you only this. Matsio Keke, the eldest of the elders, 80 years of age, the last man in Obayagu who still knew the languages of the earth the way his grandfather's grandfather had taught. He knelt and pressed his palm flat to the ground. He held it there. When he rose, his face held the particular expression of a man who has been confirmed in his worst suspicion and finds no comfort whatsoever in being right. "A child," he said. His voice was almost nothing. Something was placed into this ground, and it was still breathing when it was placed. The night held its breath. Adana thought of Iphioma, the laugh, the hymn book, the yellow dress, the embroidery, the conversation at the clothesline 6 days before the announcement. She did not yet name what she was feeling. Some feelings are too large to name in the dark. She only pressed her own hand over her mouth and looked up at the stars and waited for morning. The elders moved before the next dawn, not with confrontation but with community, which in Obiagu has always been a more powerful force. Word moved person to person through the village in the dark, the way urgent things move in small places. Quietly, person to person, in the language of come, you need to be present for what is about to happen. By the time the light broke over Obiagu, perhaps 60 people stood before the pastor's gate. When Pastor Caleb opened it himself, dressed already in his church clothes, which was its own message, since it was not a Sunday, and saw the elders and Adana, and Deacon Tobias, and the herbalist, and what was behind them, the gathered weight of the entire community he had led and been trusted by, something moved across his face. Not surprise. Not guilt. Something closer to exhaustion. The expression of a man who has been carrying something for so long that the fear of its discovery has become, itself, a kind of relief. He stepped aside. He let them in. I will not describe in detail what was found. There are truths that the tongue must carry gently, not because they are too terrible to speak, but because they belong to someone who can no longer speak for herself, and that belonging deserves more respect than spectacle. I will tell you only this, she was found. And I will tell you, she had not been there long enough to be beyond all help. But she had been there long enough for the sounds Deacon Tobias had heard at night to have been real. Long enough for a child to have called out in the dark beneath her own father's compound floor, and to have heard only silence answer. Long enough. Long enough. Sister Chioma collapsed. Whether she had known the full truth or had chosen, deliberately and consistently, the mercy of unknowing, that mercy collapsed with her. The knowledge entered her completely. There was no not knowing anymore. She crumpled to the courtyard floor in her expensive lace wrapper and her gold jewelry, and not one of those things was of any use to her. Pastor Caleb stood at the edge of his compound and watched everything without fleeing, without fighting, without collapsing into the repentance that would have been, at least, a recognizable human response. Those closest said his lips were moving, quietly, continuously, in a repetitive low murmur, not asking forgiveness, not praying, completing something, as though whatever rite he had begun could not be interrupted, even now, even here. Motsi Okeke walked to him, stood before him, and said, with the full weight of his 80 years and the full authority of everything the earth had just confirmed, the thing you made a pact with does not honor its own agreements. You will receive everything you paid for, and everything you did not realize you were paying for. All of it. Pastor Caleb said nothing. What happened to Pastor Caleb Nady in the months that followed was spoken of in Obiagu as the curse completing its terms. The money unraveled first. The new building developed fractures along its foundation, not slowly, as buildings normally crack, but with a persistence that no mason could permanently address. Sealed cracks reopened. New cracks appeared where none had been, as though the structure above the ground was being rejected by what lay beneath it. The gleaming car was found one morning with every window broken from the inside, and no explanation that the laws of physics would accept. The bank accounts, which had held wealth that no congregation's tithes and no legitimate income could ever have produced, simply emptied. Not stolen. Not withdrawn. Not traced to any transaction. Simply gone, the way a loan is recalled by a lender who has decided the borrower has already received full value. The compound became uninhabitable. Those nearby reported that on certain nights, not every night, but enough nights, sounds returned from within. Now there was no living child to account for them. There was only Pastor Caleb, alone in the tiled rooms his wealth had built, in the silence of his own choosing, hearing whatever it is that men hear when the thing they invited in decides that the agreed transaction has not concluded. That there is, in fact, a remaining balance. He began to sleep only in daylight, sitting upright in corners, unable to lie flat. He was found standing in the market on 3 separate mornings, completely motionless in the noise and movement, head tilted slightly, listening, always listening, to something just beneath the frequency that other ears could reach. His face had thinned dramatically. His famous smile was gone. His eyes, when they focused on you, focused a moment too long and a degree too far, as though looking at something just behind you. Sister Chioma left for her family's home in another state. She took nothing with her from the compound. Not even her clothes. She left everything inside, closed the gate behind her and did not look back. Those who saw her walk to the motor park said she moved with the careful step of someone who is never again going to be certain that the ground beneath her is what it appears to be. The church was taken over by the diocese. A new pastor was assigned. The new pastor spent his entire first week in Obayagu on his knees in the old church building, praying over every square inch of the floor. Pastor Caleb was removed to the home of a distant relative. Last confirmed report, he was found in a small bare room, seated against the wall, knees drawn to his chest. His hand pressed flat on the floor. Pressing. Listening. The same gesture Matsuo Keke had made at the wall. As though, having been on one side of the earth's secret, he was now on the other, and still could not stop trying to hear across it. Obayagu did not recover cleanly because it was not a clean wound. There is a particular damage that happens to a community when something evil has lived inside it wearing the face of the sacred. It is not the damage of an external attack. From an enemy, you can harden. You can prepare. You can build walls. But from a pastor? From a father? From a man who prayed over your sick children with the same hands that were also planning something in the dark? That kind of damage does not repair itself on a schedule. It repairs itself in increments, over years, as trust is rebuilt plank by plank, with each plank tested before weight is placed upon it. Old Matsuo Keke sat under the Udala tree and said to anyone who would listen, "We saw the fast fruit, and we called it harvest. We should have called it a warning." Deacon Tobias sat outside his door in the evenings for the rest of that year and looked at the space where the compound gate used to stand. Sold now, removed, the new owners having quietly demolished the entire structure within months. He told his granddaughter, "The sounds I heard and did not act on, those will be the last sounds I hear before I leave this earth. God willing, that means He will allow me many more years before I have to account for them." Adana Ease planted a garden. On the ground near where the marked earth had been, cleared now, the old compound demolished and the earth given several months of open sky and rain before anyone would touch it, Adana planted flowers. The kind that bloom even in the dry season. Orange and yellow and white, pushing through the red earth with the particular stubbornness of living things that have not been informed that this was a bad location for beauty. She tended it in the early mornings before the village woke. She sang over it, not hymns, or not only hymns. Something older, the way her grandmother had sung, that carries the names of things before they take the form that makes them nameable. It is a modest garden. But in Obayagu, it is understood to be the loudest thing in the village. The church met again. Slowly. Cautiously. With a new pastor who arrived without a car and wore ordinary clothes, and whose first act was to remove the pulpit from its elevated platform and sit on the floor with the congregation in a circle, and say, "Ask me anything." A shepherd who cannot be questioned has forgotten who he serves. And a congregation that does not ask questions has been kept, not taught. We start again from the floor. Equal height. Ask. They did not trust him immediately. Trust, in Obayagu, now moves at the pace that trust deserves. Slowly. With each step tested. With each plank pressed before weight was committed to it. Which is perhaps the only clean thing that came out of all of this. A village that had learned, at the highest possible cost, to love its shepherd without surrendering its sight. I have carried this story to you with both hands, the way the elders say difficult things should be carried. Not flung. Not buried again. Carried. I have not told it to frighten you away from faith. Faith is not the villain of this story. The villain is what faith becomes when a man hollows it out, when he keeps the language and the posture and the title, and replaces the content with his own hunger. When the robe remains, and everything inside it changes. I have not told you to be suspicious of every person who stands before a congregation, but perhaps to return to you something you were never meant to surrender, your sight. Your right to ask questions. Your responsibility is to love a shepherd and also watch for the wolf, because those two things are not opposites. They are the same faithful act. This story holds 4 things. Hold them with me. A man who was genuinely called, and who encountered a crossroads in the dark, and chose the wrong direction. Not once, dramatically, but slowly, quietly, by degrees, until the wrong direction was the only one his feet still knew. A community that loved so fully it forgot to see. That explained away each warning because the warning would have required them to grieve something they were not ready to lose. A woman who had nothing left to protect except the truth, and who discovered that this is the only condition under which certain truths will allow themselves to be found. And a child who carried no responsibility for any of this, and paid the price for all of it, who called out in the dark and was not answered, whose memory Obiagu now tends in a garden of orange and yellow flowers that refuse to acknowledge that this was a bad place for beauty. The old ones say that blood cannot be buried. It is not a poetic expression. It is a statement of fact older than the language used to express it. Blood moves through the earth the way water moves, finding the cracks, following the contours of the ground, surfacing where the surface is weakest. A man may cover his sin with concrete and prosperity, and the authority of his position, and the volume of his prayers. He may surround it with testimonies, offerings, and the loyalty of those who love him. But the earth remembers, and the blood remembers, and the child remembered, even in the dark, even alone, even without answer. She remembered that she had been alive. And she was right. Let those who walk in light walk humbly, remembering that the light must be earned each morning anew and is never permanently owned. Let every community remember its right to ask, where did this come from? Whose hands built this? What does this wealth require of the ones we cannot see? And let no one who hears this story ever again mistake silence for safety, or comfort for loyalty, or the loudness of a man's testimony for the truth of what he does in the quiet.